The most powerful piece in chess, the queen, the one that can cross the entire board in a single move, spent the first 1,000 years of this game as the weakest piece on it. It could move one square, diagonally. That was the whole power. The story of how that changed is also the story of how an Indian war game survived the fall of empires, fooled Napoleon with a machine, decided a Cold War, and ended up teaching artificial intelligence to think. This is the real history of chess, and almost none of it happened the way you think. It begins in northern India around 1,500 years ago in the Gupta Empire. The game was called Chaturanga, Sanskrit for 4 divisions. Not 4 players. 4 divisions of an army: infantry, cavalry, elephants, and chariots. Look at a chessboard today and you're looking at a battlefield frozen in the 6th century. The pawns are the foot soldiers. The knights are the cavalry. The rooks, those little castle towers, were chariots. And the bishops, they were war elephants. But here's what's strange. There was no queen. Standing beside the king was a single advisor. And to understand how that advisor became the deadliest piece on the board, you have to follow this game out of India, west, into the heart of an empire that was about to fall. It crossed into Persia, where they called it Chaturanga. And the advisor finally got a name: the Farzan, the king's vizier, his most trusted counselor. The Persians fell in love with the game. They studied it, wrote about it, turned it into an art. And they gave us a phrase you've said 1,000 times without knowing where it came from. When a player trapped the enemy king, he would say 2 words: Shah Mat. Shah, king. You still hear it every time you say check. And Mat, here's the part nearly everyone gets wrong. People will tell you it means the king is dead. It doesn't. It means the king is helpless, cornered, out of moves. Checkmate was never an execution. It's the exact moment a ruler realizes there is nowhere left to run. And running was precisely what the Persians were about to do. Because in the 7th century, their empire was overrun, and the game fell into the hands of people who would turn it into a science. When the Islamic conquest swept through Persia, the game, now called Chaturanga, spread across the entire Muslim world, from Baghdad to Spain. And for the first time, chess got serious. Scholars wrote the first real strategy manuals. They named opening sequences. They composed puzzles so elegant that masters 1,000 years later still study them today. This is where the first chess celebrities appear. Players so dominant that "he plays like a Suli" became a saying for someone simply untouchable. And then, carried along trade routes in the conquest of Spain, the game crossed into Christian Europe. That's where everything changed, not because Europe didn't just play the game, it rewrote it. Europe looked at these foreign pieces and remade them in its own image. The Persian vizier sat beside the king, and so Europeans turned it into a queen. The war elephant, a creature most Europeans had never seen, became a bishop in England, a jester in France, a runner in Germany, every culture guessing at a shape it didn't recognize. But the queen, that's where history turns. For nearly 1,000 years, she had crept one square at a time, the weakest piece on the board. Then, in the late 1400s, in Spain and Italy, someone broke the rules. They gave the queen the power to move any distance in any direction. Overnight, the slowest piece became the fastest, and the most lethal thing on the board. Players were stunned. They called the new version Mad Queen Chess. Games that once dragged on for hours could suddenly end in a handful of moves. And historians have noticed something. This happened at the exact moment Europe was ruled by some of the most powerful women in its history. Isabella of Castile above all. A real queen reshaping kingdoms, and a chess queen reshaping the board in the very same decade. Coincidence? Maybe. But the game you play today was born in those years. And the next twist in this story isn't about a piece at all, it's about a machine. In 1770, an inventor named Wolfgang von Kempelen unveiled a machine to the Empress of Austria. It was a wooden figure dressed as a Turkish sorcerer, seated at a cabinet, and it could play chess, not just play it. Beat almost everyone who sat across from it. They called it the Turk. It toured Europe and America for decades. It defeated Benjamin Franklin. It defeated Napoleon Bonaparte, who, the story goes, tried to cheat and watched the machine sweep the pieces off the board in response. For more than 80 years, the Turk made people ask a terrifying question. Can a machine think? The answer, it turned out, was no. The Turk was a hoax. A brilliant one. Hidden inside the cabinet, sliding on a rolling seat behind a maze of fake gears, was a living chess master, working the whole thing by hand. It was a trick. But it planted an idea that would not go away. That one day, a machine really might beat us. Hold on to that thought, because the game was about to enter its most beautiful and most violent era. The 1800s were chess's age of romance. Not romance as in love, romance as in glory. The style was all-out attack. You were expected to throw away your most valuable pieces for a single brilliant checkmate. Winning by grinding your opponent down was considered almost cowardly. In 1851, two players produced a game so dazzling, one side giving up a bishop, both rooks and the queen, to force mate, that it is still called the Immortal game. Then came an American named Paul Morphy, who appeared from nowhere, crushed the best players on Earth, and walked away from the game almost as fast as he'd arrived. They called him the pride and the sorrow of chess. But romance never lasts. In 1886, a man named Wilhelm Steinitz became the first official world chess champion. And he won by doing the unthinkable. He stopped attacking. He argued chess wasn't about heroic sacrifice at all. It was about tiny, patient advantages, stacked one on top of another until the position itself won the game. It was less beautiful. It was far more effective. And it turned chess from an art into something closer to a science, which is exactly what made it the perfect weapon for what came next. By the 20th century, one country had decided that chess belonged to it, the Soviet Union. The state poured everything into the game. They built academies, trained children from the age of 4, and produced champion after champion. Chess wasn't a hobby there, it was proof. Proof that the Soviet mind was superior. For decades, no one could touch them. Until 1972. A lone American, brilliant, paranoid, impossible to deal with, named Bobby Fischer, challenged the Soviet world champion Boris Spassky. They met in Reykjavik, Iceland, at the height of the Cold War. It was billed as the match of the century, and it was about so much more than chess. It was America against the Soviet machine, played out on 64 squares while the entire world watched. Fischer almost didn't show. He raged about the cameras, the lighting, the noise. He forfeited a game in protest, and then he sat down and took apart the greatest chess machine ever built. When Fischer won, he didn't just take a title. He broke a Soviet grip on the crown that had held for nearly a quarter of a century, and for one strange summer, a chessboard was the most important battlefield on Earth. But the greatest opponent chess would ever face wasn't Russian. It wasn't even human. Remember the Turk, the fake machine that only pretended to think? 200 years later, a real one arrived. Its name was Deep Blue, built by IBM. And in 1997, it sat across the board from Garry Kasparov, quite possibly the strongest human player who has ever lived. The year before, Kasparov had beaten an earlier version, and the world breathed easy. But IBM rebuilt the machine. And in the rematch, something happened that rattled Kasparov to his core. The computer made a move so strange, so eerily human, that he became convinced a person was secretly helping it. No one was. It was pure calculation, on a scale no human could match. Kasparov lost. For the first time in 1,500 years, the best chess player on the planet was not a person. The question the Turk had faked an answer to back in 1770 was finally, genuinely settled. But here's the catch. Deep Blue won by brute force, by counting millions of positions every second. It didn't understand chess, it just calculated faster than we ever could. The truly unsettling part came 20 years later, when a machine learned to actually understand. In 2017, a program called AlphaZero was handed the rules of chess and nothing else. No openings, no strategy, no human games to learn from. None of the centuries of theory we'd painstakingly built. Just the rules, and itself to play against. In about 4 hours, it taught itself to play chess better than any human, and better than any program in history. 4 hours to surpass 1,500 years of human knowledge. And it didn't play like a machine. It sacrificed pieces for long-term position, the way the old romantics did. It made moves grandmasters called beautiful, even alien-like strategies no human had ever dared try, because they look wrong, right up until the moment they win. AlphaZero didn't just beat us at our own game, it showed us we'd been playing it for 1,500 years with our eyes half closed, which makes what happened next almost poetic. You'd assume a game solved by machines would quietly die. Instead, chess is more alive right now than at any point in its entire history. A pandemic sent the world indoors. A show about a fictional chess prodigy became a global phenomenon. Millions of people who had never touched a board logged on to play, to watch, to learn from grandmasters streaming live to audiences bigger than the whole game once had. 1,500 years ago, this was 4 divisions of an Indian army, carved into wood. It survived the empire that made it. It outlived the empire that conquered it. It crossed oceans, rewrote its own rules, fooled emperors, decided a Cold War, and handed artificial intelligence its first real proving ground. And through every empire, every machine, every century, the goal never once changed. Trap the king, until there is nowhere left to run. Shah Mat. Not the king is dead. The king is out of moves.